Man, I had to go outside and go for a walk before I did this video to cool off. And I'm still pissed off. I'm still pissed. This was straight up sabotage. Stephanie White, you are a bum. Aaliyah Boston, you are even more of a bum. You are a $6 million piece of garbage out there. Your ass can't make a layup. You refuse to pass the ball to Caitlin Clark. You stink. You stink. You've been intentionally not passing the ball to Caitlin Clark for the last 7-8 games. We've been watching and counting. I've been watching your ass not pass her the ball. You can't make a layup to save your life. You just as garbage at layups as
If you thought the Indiana Fever's loss to the Dallas Wings was just another frustrating night, the scenes surrounding Caitlin Clark suggest something much bigger may be happening. Indiana fell 91-85. But the final score only tells part of the story. What really caught attention was the way the Fever's offense operated, the lack of rhythm for several players, and the increasingly uncomfortable body language between Clark and head coach Stephanie White. Before we go any further, it is important to separate what was visibly happening on the court from the much stronger accusations being made by fans and commentators. The source material frames the game as possible sabotage, but that is an allegation, not an established fact. What we can examine are the decisions, the numbers, and the moments that caused so much controversy. From the opening possession, the offensive emphasis appeared heavily focused on Kelsey Mitchell. The first play was designed to get Mitchell involved, with Clark making the pass that helped create a trip to the free throw line. Mitchell ultimately had an outstanding scoring night, finishing with 37 points and going 15 for 15 from the free throw line. But the question became whether Indiana could get everyone else involved. According to the source material, Clark did not receive a designed pick-and-roll or ball screen action until just 15 seconds remained in the second quarter. Whether that was intentional or simply the result of the game plan, the effect was obvious. Clark struggled to find a consistent rhythm, and that matters because Clark is at her best when she can control tempo, manipulate defenses, create for teammates, and attack gaps. If she spends long stretches away from the ball, the entire character of the offense can change. The same problem appeared to affect other Fever players. Sophie Cunningham reportedly finished without a made three-pointer, going 0 for 4 from beyond the arc. When shooters receive limited opportunities or touches late in possessions, rhythm becomes extremely difficult to establish. Clark finished with 10 points, 9 assists, and 4 rebounds while shooting for 4-15 from the field, and 2 for 8 from 3. Perhaps the most revealing number was 1. She attempted only 1 free throw. For a player whose game is built around pressure, movement, and creating opportunities, that statistic immediately raises questions. Meanwhile, Dallas took advantage. Jessica Shepard had an enormous impact inside, while Ariko Gunbal scored 32 points. The Wings entered the matchup after losing 8 of their previous 11 games, making Indiana's defeat even more disappointing for Fever supporters. But the biggest storyline was not simply the loss. It was the growing tension. At several points, cameras appeared to capture Clark disengaging from instructions on the sideline. One particularly noticeable moment came when she turned away from White and walked toward the bench. Fans immediately interpreted that as evidence of a broken relationship between the star player and her coach. That interpretation cannot be confirmed simply from body language, but there is no question that the moment created a huge reaction. And suddenly, this was no longer just about one box score. It became a conversation about whether Indiana is building the right system around its most important player. The Fever now face a difficult question. Was this simply one poorly executed offensive game, or is it evidence of deeper problems that could become impossible to ignore? And that is where things get even more interesting. Because the numbers tell one story, while the chemistry on the court appears to be telling another. The most fascinating part of this situation is that Kelsey Mitchell actually played extremely well. She scored 37 points, shot 9 for 18 from the field, and converted every one of her 15 free throws. So this is not a story about Mitchell failing. In fact, Mitchell did exactly what a veteran scorer is supposed to do when opportunities come her way. The controversy is about balance. When one player becomes the overwhelming focus of an offense, everyone else has to find ways to remain involved. That becomes especially important when you have a player like Caitlin Clark, whose greatest value comes from creating advantages for the entire team. Clark finished with 9 assists despite struggling to score. That tells you something important. Even on a night when her own offense was limited, she was still finding ways to create for others. But according to the source material, there were repeated situations where Clark would give the ball up and then struggle to get it back. The criticism became particularly intense around interactions involving Aaliyah Boston. Some observers argued that Boston was not consistently setting effective screens or completing handoff actions with Clark. Again, claims that these decisions were deliberate cannot be established from the footage alone. But the basketball question is completely legitimate. If Clark and Boston are supposed to be foundational pieces of Indiana's offense, why did their player actions appear so ineffective during this matchup? That question becomes even more important when Dallas began pressuring Clark aggressively. When defenders know the ball may not come back to the same player after a pass, they can become more aggressive with their defensive positioning. Clark can be forced farther away from the action, while teammates become easier to predict. That is exactly why offensive chemistry matters. A great offense cannot simply depend on one player scoring 37 points while another star playmaker struggles to become involved. Against stronger opponents, predictability gets punished, and Dallas punished Indiana. The Wings found success through Ogunbowale and Shepherd, attacking an Indiana defense that struggled to contain them. Shepherd was particularly efficient early, reportedly shooting 10 for 11 in the first half, before finishing with 26 points and 8 rebounds. So while Fever fans were focused on Clark's involvement, Dallas was quietly building the foundation for an upset. Then came the moment everyone started talking about. During a tense sideline sequence, White appeared to speak directly to Clark. Clark then turned away, raised her hands, and walked toward the bench. Was that proof of a fractured relationship? No one outside the team can honestly say that from one clip. But was it an uncomfortable moment? Absolutely. And because Clark is one of the most closely watched athletes in basketball, every expression, every gesture, and every interaction gets magnified. That is the reality of being Caitlin Clark. The problem for Indiana is that these moments are now becoming part of a larger narrative. If the team keeps losing while Clark appears disconnected from the offensive system, the questions will only grow louder, and the pressure will not be limited to White. It will eventually reach the front office. Indiana invested heavily in building around this core. Clark is the centerpiece. Mitchell is an elite scorer. Boston is supposed to provide interior production and defensive strength. The supporting cast is expected to make the entire system work. But against Dallas, the pieces never appeared to move together consistently. That is why the 6-point loss feels bigger than 6 points. The Fever did not simply lose a game. They exposed weaknesses that opponents can study. And now Indiana has to decide whether those weaknesses are temporary problems, or signs that the current defensive structure needs a major adjustment. Because if the Fever want to compete at the highest level, they cannot afford to waste possessions. They certainly cannot afford to waste Caitlin Clark's playmaking ability, and they cannot afford to let frustration become the defining story of their season. There is still time to fix it, but the clock is moving. The biggest question coming out of this game is not whether Caitlin Clark had a bad shooting night. She did. The bigger question is why the Fever offense struggled to put her in positions where she could influence the game consistently. That distinction matters. Great players have bad games. Even MVP-level players miss shots, lose rhythm, and make mistakes. One night should never be enough to declare a franchise broken. But when the same concerns begin appearing repeatedly, coaches and front offices have to pay attention. Clark finished this game with 10 points and 9 assists. Her scoring was inefficient, but her passing remained valuable. That means the Fever still had access to her biggest strength even while her shot was not falling. The challenge was turning those opportunities into a coherent defensive system. Kelsey Mitchell showed what happens when a player gets into rhythm. She scored 37 points and carried a huge portion of Indiana's offense. But Indiana still lost. That should tell everyone something. Individual production is not automatically team success. The Fever need multiple players functioning together. They need Clark creating advantages. They need Mitchell attacking defenses. They need Boston finishing inside and setting strong actions. They need their shooters receiving timely opportunities. And they need their bench players understanding exactly where their shots are coming from. They need Clark creating advantages. They need Mitchell attacking defenses. They need Boston finishing inside and setting strong actions. They need their shooters receiving timely opportunities. And they need their bench players understanding exactly where their shots are coming from. The Fever now have to answer those questions through basketball, not through social media arguments, not through excuses, not through trying to control the narrative. The answer has to come on the court. If White adjusts the offense and gets Clark more involved, improves the chemistry between Clark and Boston, and finds a better balance between Mitchell's scoring and Clark's playmaking, this game could eventually be remembered as nothing more than a frustrating loss. But if the same problems continue, the pressure will become much harder to contain, because Clark is not just another player on this roster. She is the centerpiece of Indiana's future, and every decision involving her is going to receive enormous attention. That means Indiana has very little room for prolonged dysfunction. The Fever have to decide what identity they want. Do they want to build an offense around movement, spacing, playmaking, and Clark's ability to control a game? Or do they want to rely primarily on isolation scoring and hope individual performances can carry them through difficult nights? The Dallas game suggested the second approach is not enough, and perhaps that is the most important takeaway of all. The Fever do not need to choose between Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Mitchell. They need to figure out how to make their strengths work together. Mitchell's scoring can open opportunities for Clark. Clark's passing can create easier looks for Mitchell. Boston can become the interior threat that makes defenses pay for trapping Clark. The supporting cast can provide the spacing that allows all three to operate. That is the formula. The question is whether Indiana can execute it consistently, because the next chapter of this story will not be decided by one viral sideline clip. It will be decided by what happens next. If the Fever respond with better offensive movement, stronger chemistry, and more confidence in their star playmaker, the Dallas loss could become a turning point. If they continue looking disconnected, then the questions surrounding Stephanie White, Caitlin Clark, and the Fever's long-term direction will only become louder.